Injuries, they suck, but unfortunately it's something that pretty much everyone will have to deal with at some point in their training. Although we can work very, very hard to try and prevent them, it is best to understand how to prepare to manage them so we can get back to doing the things we love faster. So I'm currently about 6 months post labrum tear on this shoulder right here. And a few days ago, I did my first handstand push-ups since. Felt like kind of a big achievement for me, seeing as at the start, doing a push-up was pretty painful and simply hanging was almost impossible. But that path from injury to recovery hasn't been so clear, and often it's hard to know where to go. You kind of have two general camps. You have the person who pretends the injury isn't happening, keeps training, and then just makes things worse. Then you have the person who is hyper aware of pain and discomfort and will take a lot of time off and be reluctant to come back training. Neither are ideal. We want to be somewhere in the middle. If you had a runny nose, you wouldn't necessarily go to see the doctor. But if you break your arm, probably advisable. So point number one, take your medicine, get some professional advice. Don't just listen to a kid. Gee, I'm not a kid now, I'm 29, I feel old. Don't listen to a guy on the internet. Understand what the problem is, and then we can go about addressing it and solving them. The main thing is understanding that rest isn't always best and trying to figure out what it is that you can do so in some way you can work towards getting that injury better. In the last episode, we talked about how training and capacity correlate together. As our capacity builds, we're able to tolerate more intense activity and more activity. Often injuries happen because the intensity or the amount of training that we're doing exceeds our capacity, which is bad. So a common attitude to recovering from an injury is just to take a rest for 2 or 3 weeks, and then they try to come back and do the same thing that they were doing beforehand. During that time, our capacity will decrease further. Instead, it's best to meet our injury where we best can. Find a level of exercise, both in terms of the amount that you can do and the intensity that you can do, that your injury can handle. And then we can build up from there. There is also a psychological component, not just physical, to getting back and doing some training. Whenever we have an injury, there is going to be pain. But it is important that we understand that discomfort and pain is a necessary part of the recovery process and getting back to full strength. If we catastrophize and become fearful of this pain, which maybe then leads us to avoiding either exercises or movement, exercise in general, then this can actually lead us towards the path of this injury becoming chronic. And this is something called the fear avoidance model. It's easy to feel that an injury is never going to get better and there's nothing that you can do, but there always is. Even if you can't directly train the area, there is always something in a practice that can be done. When I had chronic elbow tendonitis several years ago now, I couldn't really do any upper body training, but during this period of time, that's actually when I managed to get really into flexibility training and finally achieved the middle splits over that 1 year where I couldn't focus on upper body training. My attention, my energy went elsewhere whilst I was patient and letting that injury recover. So what should you actually do? This is the big question and probably something that you need to address individually with some professional advice. But I thought I would share how I go about approaching a return to sport, return to pain-free movement and recovering from injury. It's important to understand that the movement isn't just a singular piece. It is in fact made up of several different components that when built together create the overall thing that is the movement, whether this be a chin-up, a push-up, a squat, whatever it is. Through rehab, we can learn to isolate and then integrate, building up strength in the injured area, capacity, and then confidence to be able to perform movements. So when it comes to scaling back and building more of a foundation with a movement, with injury, there's a few things that we can adjust. Primarily, that is going to be load, it's going to be stability, and it's going to be the speed of a movement. First place I would start is load. If we can't do a full push-up, for example, let's do a push-up with our hands elevated onto a block. If we're doing something in a gym, just simply use less weight. Then comes the next element, which is going to be the speed of a move. Try performing movements simply slower, sort of 3 or 4 seconds in each phase of the movement, so both lifting and lowering. This might need to be so slow, in fact, that we actually perform isometric exercises. This is often one of the best places to start when you have an injury because we can work on contracting the area. Isometrics cause minimal muscle damage, so we shouldn't have any issues making an injury worse, and they're also very self-controlled. So we can apply as much force in this isometric position as we can tolerate. I can physically choose to press harder or less hard into an object that I'm performing the isometric against as my injury allows. Finally, we have stability. I think this one's relatively obvious. If you've got an injury in your shoulder, it's probably best not to do something that's super wobbly on the rings or challenge yourself to doing a handstand. Both these movements require a lot of shoulder stability, which is not going to support us feeling safe to be able to improve. And improvement is the key. Let's start with this foundation, let's then build upon it, and eventually we get back to being able to perform our normal exercises. So all of this is nice to know, but maybe hard to put into context. Let me give you a personal example of how I rehabbed. So I had a labrum tear on the shoulder. Now a labrum tear is going to cause more instability in the shoulder, not necessarily pain or discomfort, but the muscles around it are going to have to work harder. That meant for me, the most important element to adjust was that stability. The physio who I saw, his recommendation actually was just to start with isometric movements. So there's no movement going on and we can focus on contracting around that position stronger. The two movements that I primarily focused on here was hanging and push-ups, because these were nice and simple. For the hanging, I adjusted this by having my feet on the floor. So I was able to take some weight, reduce the load to a point in which I could tolerate. I also played around a bit with having my body at a slight angle, so my shoulders weren't exactly perfectly overhead. The more I lifted my shoulders overhead, the more pain and discomfort I had. So I used less range of motion and then tried to increase that range of motion as my pain improved. For the push-ups, I used something called a tri-pause negative. So this basically involves performing 3 pauses on the lowering phase of a push-up at the top, at the middle, and at the bottom, each for 10 seconds, which meant that each rep of a push-up lasted 30 seconds, lots of time under tension, lots of ability to build capacity in the muscles around the joint, and then also the ability for me to focus on being stable, strong, contracting the structures around the shoulder. And then really from there, it's a matter of patience and not rushing it. Most of the time with injuries, they will get better, providing we don't do something stupid to jeopardize that recovery. When I had this injury in March of this year, I personally said to myself, I'm not even expecting to be at a level that I can perform movements pain-free, comfortably before the end of the year. So that was about 8 or 9 months that I gave myself. No rush, just building up gradually towards being able to perform basics. Probably because I've had my fair share of injuries in the past, I know that this process isn't quick and it's best just to take your time and have other things that you can focus on, like just do the work that you need to do. If you've got spare mental energy, if you've got spare capacity, work on something else that is exciting to you and maybe complements your practice, like developing some flexibility or developing some new skills. For me, the past 6 months, I've been doing just a little bit of aerobic work, which has been kind of fun. I don't really like running, I don't really like aerobic work, but it's something that I've avoided doing in my training. So I've made the efforts with the extra time that I've had to make that happen. So this has basically been my attitude over the past 6 months. I hope maybe it helps you out if you are having an injury. The biggest thing that I can reiterate is that things will get better. You're not broken, you haven't done something wrong. Just focus on the things that you can do and build up from there. Of course, I'm going to continue to share my own practice, where I'm at with this rehab as I continue to work back to getting strong and flexible. Again, if you want to stay around for that one, then please hit that subscribe button. Don't miss out on any more future videos. Also, let me know in the comment section down below if you have any questions for me that you'd like me to address and answer, something that I maybe haven't covered in this video or other videos. I want to make sure that I'm helping you guys out. That's why I do what I do. Other than that, we'll catch you in the next one. Have a strong week.